From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, this is From the South. I am Doris Polo. Following the suspension of the municipal elections on Sunday, President of the Dominican Liberation Party, Temistocles Montas, has accused the opposition of being responsible for boycotting the elections.
The Dominican Revolutionary Party, the Free Action Party, the Popular Democratic Party, and the Christian Democratic Union, and the Pending Revolutionary Party, and others allied sectors denounce in front of the national and international community that what has happened in the municipal electoral process convened this Sunday in Dominican Republic was an act of sabotage. We had warned that different opposition sectors have been undermining the reputation of the Central Electoral Board as they have worked to discredit and ruin these elections as it has happened.
The Dominican Liberation Party also criticized the Central Electoral Board for suspending the elections.
We disagree with the decision of total suspension because if the problem was limited to places with electronic counting systems, then we think that the rest of the municipalities using manual counting should have been allowed to continue to exercise their voting rights, as it was communicated to the Central Electoral Board by our Secretary General.
Meanwhile, the president of the Fuerza del Pueblo party, Leonel Fernandez, denounced the irregularities presented by the automated voting system during the municipal elections this Sunday.
Unfortunately, those measures that apply anywhere in the world where elections are held with automated voting were not, however, adopted in our country by the Central Electoral Board, neither in the primaries of the 6th of October nor for the municipal elections scheduled for today.
In Venezuela, the Bolivarian National Armed Forces successfully completed the Bolivarian Shield 2020 drills held over the weekend. More than 2,300,000 troops participated in the military exercises, which were held throughout the country. The exercises, which were called by President Nicolas Maduro, were intended to strengthen the civic-military union in the context of the recent approval of a new law, which incorporates the Bolivarian civilian militia as a component of the military. Missile, air defense, and terrestrial systems were tested in areas which included the Colombian border region, but also in cities. President Maduro has argued that the strengthening of the territorial defense is critical given the ongoing attempts by the United States to intervene in the country's internal affairs.
This tests out the levels that we have reached for preparation in defense of the country. Incredible. I'm amazed by the exercise of command and control, which is the capacity to communicate, to lead, to conduct, and through distinct coding, signals, messages, means of communication. The level that the Bolivarian militia has reached is impressive, to complement the rest of the Bolivarian National Armed Forces. For that reason, we are glad that this component of the militia has been incorporated into the Bolivarian National Armed Forces. With this will be impenetrable, as our commander Chavez would say. The city is impenetrable, the people impenetrable, our geographic space is impenetrable, the homeland impenetrable.
We have complied with the orders issued by our Commander-in-Chief, Nicolás Maduro Moro, which has to carry the exercise Bolivarian Shield. We have completed 95% of the tasks, and we are finalizing the execution phase of launching an automatic missile from the missile frigate Almirante Luis Brion F-22 station.
Over the weekend, Venezuela's communication minister Jorge Rodriguez said that the country's opposition is leading a corruption network, which has seized more than $116 million from the country.
We are suing Trump's administration in the present times because of the accounting of the theft of our assets, of our deposits in foreign banks, of our companies that are in border cities, of all our income that could have been generated if there was no financial blockade, towards the imports that Venezuela needs, as they are doing at the moment. the companies that depend from the North American empire, which rises to $116 million. That is the accounted damage of the brutal act done by Trump's administration and the satellite governments and the Lakers that are here in Venezuela.
Shifting gears now, social organizations in Colombia are calling for a de-escalation of tension between the government of Iván Duque and the largest remaining guerrilla group, the ELN. The call comes after the guerrilla group announced a 3-day armed strike, mainly in the northeast of the country.
The National Liberation Army guerrilla, ELN, has a presence in at least 5 regions of Colombia and a strong influence in the departments of Arauca, Chocó, and the north of Santander, areas in which there have been some acts of war, burning of vehicles and a public transport stoppage after this organization announced a 3-day armed strike.
I think this strike is maybe the most important political act of the ELN in the last decade because it has had a huge impact and dimension. The President and Defense Minister have spoken about it. The people in the cities are worried. The strike that started on Friday morning and is going to go on until Sunday evening. About 30 vehicles have been banned in some regions of the country.
Terminación inmediata de todos los beneficios otorgados a ellos en el pasado por el Estado y la activación de las circulares rojas de la Interpol.
The government of Iván Duque declared the talks with the ELN to be broken after an attack on a police school in the capital in Bogotá in January of 2019, an event that entrenched the position of the executive that has always been against the peace talk.
Indeed, the politics of the government of Duque has no room for peace with the ELN or with other guerrillas movements. It will take political pressure by citizens to make him change his policies, including the inconsistency in applying the terms of the peace agreement with the FARC. But at the same time, President Duque never gave viability to the dialogue agenda that was built by the previous government.
Social organizations are demanding that stakeholders find ways for the restoration of the dialogue between the guerrillas and the government to protect civilians who are the most affected by the conflict.
Estamos soñando.
We are dreaming of seeing the end of the conflict, but we are not seeing it happening because there is a breakdown of dialogue between the government and the National Liberation Army. But we are really concerned by the decision of the armed strike of the ELN. As civil society, we see such as moving further away from the possibility of dialogue, and we are mainly concerned because we don't see political will from the government or the ELN.
At the moment, the ELN peace delegation is in Havana, Cuba, awaiting for direct dialogue with the government, which insists on imposing conditions, a strategy that, according to analysts, is unattainable.
Staying in Latin America, in Bolivia, residents of the city of Sacaba, Cochabamba, marked 3 months since the massacre of November 15th against the community members who protested against the coup which took out President Evo Morales on November 10th. Families and residents gathered to mark the day when 9 men were killed by the military in one single operation, as those residents staged a protest on the main road connecting the city of Cochabamba to the Chapare province. Area leaders of movement towards socialism were in attendance as the victims were remembered as martyrs killed in defense of Bolivian democracy under coup leaders Janine Áñez and her interior minister Arturo Murillo. The community believes that justice will only come after the movement towards socialism governs once again. We have more stories coming up, so don't go anywhere.
Innovation, science, the technological breakthrough and its influence in society.
Viajeros del saber, el futuro está aquí.
Atomen. Monday, only on Telesur.
Welcome back. Syrian government forces have made significant advances in their military offensive against the last major rebel bastion, taking over at least 23 villages west of Aleppo. According to state television, the Russian-backed forces, quote, have liberated all the villages and small towns west of Aleppo city. The latest advances come after government forces drove rebel fighters from the key M5 highway linking Aleppo to the capital Damascus and reopened the fastest route between Syria's two biggest cities for the first time in years. Well, residents of Aleppo have gathered in the streets to celebrate recent advances by the Syrian Arab Army in regaining control of the city. Social media footage showed jubilant residents waving national flags and chanting slogans supporting the army and President Bashar al-Assad. The celebrations came after the SAA announced it had regained full control of the city. Iran's President Hassan Rouhani has denied reports that he intends to resign. He said he will remain in office to serve the mandate that the Iranian people gave to him.
My resignation does not make much sense. We have made promises to the people, and we will continue to fulfill those promises, despite the economic situation and pressure from the enemy. I would not even let the government leave its responsibility an hour earlier, not a month or a week earlier.
Today marks 9 years since former Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi was overthrown and killed by rebels supported by then U.S. President Barack Obama and Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, along with their NATO allies. 9 years down the line, the people of Libya are yet to see the freedom and democracy that NATO promised them. The once prosperous nation has plunged into chaos and bloodshed, with different warlords and militias vying for the control of the country. The nation that was once at the center of Pan-African unity has become an open-air slave market, with black Africans sold for as little as $400. Staying in Africa, relatives of the victims of Sudan's Darfur War have welcomed the decision by the transitional government to hand over former President Omar al-Bashir to the ICC to face genocide and war crimes charges. The family said the handing over of al-Bashir to the Hague-based court is a victory for the victims of the brutal war. Al-Bashir is facing 3 counts of genocide, 5 counts of crimes against humanity, and 2 counts of war crimes perpetrated by government forces and allied militias during the Darfur War between 2003 and 2008.
The handing over of Bashir is a victory for the victims, a victory for all the Sudanese people, and a warning for any other person to not repeat the same actions.
South Africa's ruling party, the African National Congress, has condemned claims by former President Frederick de Klerk that apartheid was not a crime against humanity. The ANC said de Klerk's conduct is an attempt to whitewash the brutal apartheid system. Last week, de Klerk claimed that the classification of apartheid as a crime against humanity by the United Nations in 1973 was part of an agenda by the Soviet Union and the ANC to stigmatize white South Africans. Moving to Asia, China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi says U.S. government officials are spreading lies against his country. Speaking on the sidelines of the Munich Security Conference, Yi said the U.S. has failed to accept the Asian giant's economic success.
The root cause of all these problems and issues is that the U.S. does not want to see the rapid development and rejuvenation of China, unless would they want to accept the success of a socialist country. That is not fair. China has the right to develop. The Chinese people have the right to live a better life.
Meanwhile, Chinese health authorities have continued to make progress against the COVID-19 outbreak. On Sunday, the National Health Commission announced a 10.5% reduction in the number of new confirmed cases in the city of Wuhan, the epicenter of the outbreak. The Commission said this is due to stronger prevention and control measures implemented by the government. The coronavirus has infected more than 69,000 people and killed over 1,600 since it broke out in late December.
By midnight February 15, The severe cases in Wuhan, Hubei province, and nationwide have all seen a decline in terms of the proportion. In Wuhan, the peak, 32.4%, appeared on January 28th, and this proportion has been reduced to about 21.6% on February 15. In other cities, Hubei province, the peak, 18.4%, appeared on January 27th, and this percentage has dropped to 11.1%.
We're taking one last break, so stay with us.
A review of the world news that investigates, incites analysis, and induces criticism, because every event has a context.
Pusimos el punto en ahí.
Dot in the eye. Saturdays, only on Telesur.
Welcome back. Canada's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has cancelled his trip to the Caribbean amid Indigenous protests in his country. Trudeau was expected to fly to Barbados on Monday to speak at the two-day CARICOM Heads of Government meeting, where he intended to advocate for a seat on the UN Security Council. However, concerns were raised that he would attempt to divide the region amid similar efforts by the U.S. government. Trudeau will be represented by Foreign Affairs Minister François-Philippe Champagne. Tunisian Prime Minister Elias Fakhfakh on Saturday managed to form a new government after several failed attempts. But he immediately hit a major snag after members of the Ennahda party pulled out of the coalition. Fakhfakh was appointed 2 weeks ago and tasked by the president to form a government. Ennahda which is Tunisia's biggest party, said it will only join the unity government if the party of defeated presidential candidate Nabil Karoui is allowed to join.
Despite our efforts, one of our main partners, I'm talking about Ennahda, decided this afternoon, an hour before the announcement, to withdraw from this government formation and not to give its vote of confidence at the parliament, because Tunis is not part of it. This places our country in a difficult position.
The Israeli Air Force has carried out airstrikes on the besieged Gaza Strip. Local media reports say fighter jets and helicopters on Sunday evening bombed several sites south of the city of Deir al-Balah, causing damage to homes and public buildings. The Israeli military claimed that the raids were in response to the firing of 2 projectiles from the besieged enclave. No injuries have been reported so far. Meanwhile, Israeli security forces on Saturday attacked a group of Palestinians who attempted to remove a barrier that blocked access to their village in the occupied West Bank. On Wednesday, Israeli soldiers put up barriers across several roads in towns and villages to the north and west of the city of Ramallah. Israel severely restricts Palestinians' freedom of movement through the use of approximately 100 fixed checkpoints, mobile checkpoints, settler-only roads, and other physical obstructions. Burundi's main opposition party, the National Freedom Council, has nominated its leader, Agathon Rwasa, as its candidate for the upcoming general elections. Rwasa, a former rebel leader, will be facing ruling party candidate Evariste Ndayishimiye, who was chosen by the ruling party after the current leader, Pierre Nkurunziza was forced by protests not to seek another term. Rwasa was the leading opposition candidate in 2 previous elections, but boycotted the 2010 and 2015 polls, saying there was too much repression of his supporters. Still in Burundi, over 6,000 district human remains from multiple ethnic groups have been found on the banks of the Ruvubu River. The mass graves were revealed by a local man who was a prisoner in 1972 and was forced to dig the graves. The country's Truth and Reconciliation Commission said the remains are likely to belong to the members of the Hutu ethnic group who were among the 300,000 victims of the country's civil war, which ended in 2005 after several decades.
Most of the victims were of the same ethnicity, but sometimes there were others who perished as a result of interpersonal conflicts or settling of scores. By the 10th day of our work, we had excavated 6,032 victims.
And it's already carnival in several countries in Latin America. In Uruguay, thousands are taking part in the longest carnival in the world. Let's take a look.
It's one of the most anticipated parades for all Uruguayans. Each February, tens of thousands of people participate in the parade where 50 groups of revelers present the colorful and distinct sound of 3 drums which identify the rhythm of candombe.
Candombe for Uruguay is almost everything. It's a popular movement where the black race is manifested, mixed with the white race and with the tourists. It means a lot for Uruguay. It's typical and the only place in the world where you are going to see it.
This year, the parade was organized as a tribute to Julio Sosa Canela, who died in December last year. He was one of the most famous figures of this carnival.
It's a tribute to Canela, a person who many years ago lived for candombe. He is a reference for all of us that has presented year after year. Unfortunately, he died recently, but today the celebration goes to that great man, a personality for our culture.
Candombe is recognized as an intangible world heritage by UNESCO. The rhythms are an inherited tradition rooted in the slavery era. The Africans brought as slaves passed on the knowledge and values of their rich culture, and in that process created the characteristic drums of candombe.
Today is like the Mecca for all candombe players. It is the day when, after revelers prepare and rehearse quickly, they come together in this tradition. You will see and participate in a group of 70 revelers from the whole country. This is a national contest, and candombe today is how Uruguayans are many times recognized. Where there is an Uruguayan, there is candombe.
Until a few years ago, and before the increase in the amount of revelers looking to compete for the prize of best presentation, the official parade had been organized for 2 days. More than 2,000 drums and dozens of dancers walked along the Isla de las Flores street, the main street of the South and Palermo neighborhoods, to enjoy the carnival with candombe in their hearts.
And we leave you with a presentation by La Gran Muñeca during Uruguay's Carnival with a song that speaks of the repression under Presidents Macri in Argentina and Piñera in Chile, racism under President Bolsonaro in Brazil, the coup in Bolivia, and how poverty is growing in most countries under right-wing governments. So until next time, enjoy. Llegamos al carnaval para defender la tierra. Llegamos al carnaval. Hoy América despierta, pueblos originarios que se juntaron para luchar contra los dictadores evangelistas de Donald Trump. Este es nuestro lugar y tenemos que cuidarlo, nadie nos podrá callar, suena fuerte nuestro canto, somos la patria grande y ahora nadie nos va a parar.
racismo que nos asusta.